Right. And I think it's funny that they're not, Secret Invasion, male protagonist. They fridged a fucking character. They fridged a female character.
Oh, yeah.
Long-running character. But you don't hear anybody going, yeah, it's a male lead. No, it's crickets. I don't want to say he's black, so he doesn't count. Unfortunately, I think that might be some of it. But it's Sam Jackson, man. If you can't get behind that, he's the only reason I watched it.
I'm so done with cape shit at this point.
This one's interesting because it's technically Nick Fury's a superhero, but he doesn't have superpowers. They're going back to more of his comics personality where he uses people and he does some like gray hat shit. And
he's
then
the
there
puppet
are consequences. Master. Yeah. And he has to do more gray hat shit to deal with the consequences of the original round of gray hat shit. Which
is a fascinating concept, but first, I just didn't care about the series because I've lost interest in the MCU at this point. Then the whole thing came down with the AI art intro, and you can say, oh, well, it's deliberately meant to look. I don't care.
I mean, that was misreported too. It was AI assisted. It wasn't AI generated. There were designers, and it was the same studio they hire for Wakanda Forever and Guardians of the Galaxy.
I mean, someone did point out that it was like they compared the credits for the intro art to credits for one of the previous MCU Disney Plus shows.
Yeah.
And it was like 8 people versus 23. And so artists were, of course, jumping on that, like, see, they're taking our jobs.
Okay, but they only have 8 artists to spare. The problem Disney has right now is they don't have enough animators.
Yeah. I think it was a lot of things that came together, and I'm just like, yeah, I didn't care. That was just an added influence for me to not care.
But I mean, and that's fair. Nobody is required to care.
Yeah.
And that's a mistake, I think, another mistake that's being made. But I mean, there's also the problem with Secret Invasion is the shadow of they're acting like Nick Fury's the reason the Skrull are on Earth. That's a retcon.
No, that was
the choice.
That was the result of our strong Brahmin
and
character.
I mean, at this point they've made so many. They have her ghosting Bruce Banner at the end of Shang-Chi. And like that has to be deliberate because that made me hate her. They're doing something with this.
I think Marvel is panicking with how disliked she was. And I make no secret, I don't like that movie. I didn't like her. I thought she was mean and unlikable.
Yeah.
And I don't care she was a cipher.
They're it's almost like she's turning into her Scott Pilgrim character. Slowly but surely.
I will say, though, I did not expect to get so grumpy talking about the MCU. But yeah,
Well, but there are a lot of things about the pandering that feel very, this is for you. Why don't you like it? And that's the problem with a relative few voices being treated as representatives of all women. And then media companies go, well, this is what women want. We're going to give it to you. Why don't you like it? And I admit, I would rather 12 shows like She-Hulk that really, really get people all riled up than boring ass crap that's just the same thing over and over again. Now, again, I do think that the problem with She-Hulk was not so much the show. The problem with She-Hulk was the way the dialogue surrounding the show was handled. And I don't like things like Talking Dead or Talking Saul. I don't like the after party programming. But the coverage of the show did not help anything. It did not allow the show to stand on its own merits. My take on the show, as somebody who didn't read any of the stuff surrounding it, was that she was intended to be a deeply flawed character. She's a character defined by her anger.
Oh, yeah.
So I didn't think we were supposed to treat what she said as right and good. We were allowed to disagree with her.
Well, I mean, usually when someone is raising their voice and getting angry at someone else, you're not supposed to take what they say seriously.
Yeah, like I thought she was supposed to be the heel in the scenes that everybody flipped out about.
Mm-hmm.
But I was told my interpretation was wrong. And then I got linked to some Vanity Fair articles. And I don't know what I was supposed to see in these Vanity Fair articles, because I'm one of those people where this is a work of fiction. I'm allowed to have a sincere interpretation that does not match the mainstreams.
Oh, you mean the actual definition of death of the author?
Right, exactly. I'm allowed to have, I mean, okay, I had an unpopular opinion about God of War for a really long time that actually turned out to be right. And now everybody's acting like, oh, the series has improved so much. Nope. Kratos has been a consistent character from the beginning.
It's interesting because I saw something recently that it was like video games in one sentence, and what they said about God of War was, I am a 15-year-old angry rage fantasy. I have grown since the rage fantasy. It's like,
and
yeah, that's almost like that's character growth.
Well, but Kratos's life was also never a fantasy. That's people who didn't play the game talking.
Or
was
15-year-olds who
tortured.
played it and weren't paying attention.
Maybe, but
they were too distracted when they got to bang Aphrodite and the controller was vibrating.
Okay, but that's the second game and you didn't see anything. You're probably right, but like the first thing Kratos does in the entire series is tries to kill himself. How is that a power fantasy? Like, that's the part people are getting so addicted to these tropes.
I don't think it was saying it was a power fantasy, just a rage fantasy.
But it wasn't, because his anger, he killed his wife and daughter, and the whole idea he was being controlled by the gods.
Mm-hmm.
And he was given this power to be a mighty warrior, but it also meant he lost his shit and slaughtered his family. Like, that's hardly a rage fantasy. He was haunted by what he did. Mm-hmm. And then there's the fact that it turns out he's being manipulated by everybody precisely because he gets angry and can't control his shit. Like, they saw him coming. He was used by every major power in those games. So to call it a fantasy completely misses, it's the same way people claim that something like Taxi Driver is some sort of toxic masculinity fantasy. It's a deconstruction of it. It's not saying you should be this. It's like, look at how fucked up we're making our men. And I thought She-Hulk was sort of in the same, it was attempting to do the same thing with women's stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the problem is that because it was one of the first to try, I kept hearing about, well, that's not the intention. That's not what they're trying to do. It's like, unless,
how do you know that?
Well, yeah, unless I see, well, and that's where you get into things like, well, they clearly implied, I get that all the time, that I clearly implied something. And I'm sitting here going, what? I'm saying, how the fuck did you get that from what I said? Someone's going, what?
And then they proceed to tell you
implied
your own intentions.
Yeah. And they never, like, this is obviously something that's worked on them. And instead, there's no point in complaining about this stuff if we perpetuate it the first chance we get.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I fight about some of these things, because it's not about the individual game or the individual show. It's about proper analytical processes. And that I think is extremely important. And that plot's getting lost in a lot of this shuffle. And so I do think that comes down to really, really weak opinion writing about women's issues treated as feminist criticism. Just because it's written by a woman doesn't mean it's feminist. And just because it's labeled feminist doesn't mean it's right.
Again, see Mists of Avalon.
See Mists of Avalon. See Anne Rice. See,
I had a bizarre moment a little while ago where I realized, oh, my stories are more feminist than Mists of Avalon.
Yeah, well, women have agency. I always found there were so many male characters in Mists of Avalon. I found it strange that it was held up as a work of feminism. When people told me that was a feminist work, I'm like, what? Okay, it's queer fiction, but huh?
I mean, but the women are abusing people while the men are just kind of pathetic and stupid.
Yeah, that all right, sure. And that's the thing, just slapping. I'm so sick of the is this feminist debate. I'm sick of it. Because so what?
Do you enjoy it? The only question we should be asking about any piece of media. Okay, no, that's not true.
Well, that's a valid reason to like a piece of media, though. Enjoyment is valid.
Yes. Like, here's the thing. Another video Bobby did, he mentioned, oh, people are having to apologize to Bella from Twilight. And it's an older video he did. But I commented, I will apologize to Bella Swan for nothing.
Yeah.
Because look, you know, there's this argument that, oh, people only disliked it because it's something young girls like. And they say the same thing about, oh, people only hate Justin Bieber because he was something young girls liked. Okay, I think we can all acknowledge now Justin Bieber has always been a little piece of shit.
We're quite happy to give him. There was a joke that every Canada US hockey game, loser keeps Bieber.
I remember that.
He took over from Nickelback, from Loser Keeps Nickelback. I have no issues with Nickelback. They're all right dudes.
Yeah.
And they're fine guitar pop. Like,
yes.
I don't know why people hated on Nickelback. Bieber, all right. Some
awful
talent, but all production. Yeah. And like, he did a version of Despacito. That's so basic.
Luckily, I think he was just like on the verses, but yeah,
he was.
They did the same thing with Billie Eilish's Bad Guy.
Yeah.
But so it's like with Twilight, it's like I was, I've mentioned before I love watching bad book reviews.
Yeah.
And recently I watched one that was a breakdown of the last Twilight book.
Oh, like, God.
The girl,
the birth.
Yeah, the woman who did it, she's done breakdowns of all the books. It's just taken a while. She's also done 50 Shades, and now she's on to Colleen Hoover, which, bless you, Alizé. But she really broke down all the ways that Twilight is extremely toxic. Oh, yeah. And it's like, you can't say people disliked it just because young women liked it. And I've said this with romance novels, and I'll say it with this: young women need to have higher standards for the stuff they like.
Twilight is a TERF instruction manual.
It really is.
It is. It all comes down to how much abuse Bella can take to prove her love and loyalty for Edward, and then she has a high-risk pregnancy that could kill her.
And I don't even like the term internalized misogyny, but it is all throughout that book.
Oh, well, it's also, if you want to get Mormon, it's blood atonement.
And I mentioned Colleen Hoover, who is a big name in writing right now. Mm-hmm. And there's this controversy of, does she count as romance? She's billed as romance, but most romance readers hate her because she doesn't fit the definition.
Interesting.
Of a romance is supposed to end with it. It's supposed to have a happy ending, but and some people are like, oh, well, it's dark romance, but it still doesn't fit dark romance. Her stuff is extremely toxic. And watching one of the reviews, when it was mentioned, oh yeah, she's a Christian, I'm like, yeah, that fits with
Yeah.
what I know about her books. So there is this, her men are all awful.
Right.
Her women kind of suck.
Right.
And it's like making
In
them
the
not like
we're all
other girls,
sinners way, or just horrible?
just kind of stupid.
Okay.
And they're supposed to be quirky and they all have these really weird names. One of her stories, the big one that it's getting a Blake Lively adaptation, is It Ends With Us,
Oh,
which is a story about domestic abuse,
okay.
which
This is
it
romance genre?
it's billed as romance. It's technically more women's fiction, but a
Yeah.
lot of women's fiction is getting billed at romance
Well,
to try
because
and
that's the
appeal.
woman genre, right?
Romance also makes more money
Yep.
than most women's lit, so it's a lot of stuff that should be women's lit is
Is
being billed as
okay.
romance.
That makes sense. Vaguely.
Because romance is where the money is.
Right. Makes sense.
But so it's a story of a relationship, and like I've seen people say the beginning is a great evolution for how an abusive relationship actually
Mm-hmm.
starts, and
Mm-hmm.
how it's like, oh, he pushed her, he apologized, and then it escalates, but by that point, she's been conditioned to accept his apology and take him back. But then it ends with them getting divorced, but staying friends and co-parenting their child. And she's like, oh, it was inspired by my parents and how once they divorced, they were able to be friends despite the abuse. And it's like, fuck off.
That's forced forgiveness.
That's forced forgiveness.
Yeah.
And so when I found out, oh yeah, she's a Christian, I went looking to see if she was Mormon. I couldn't find any
Right.
indication.
Right.
And I'm not sorry for that.
Well, again, Christian is more profitable.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, one of the things that you see in the Twilight Saga is it gets less Mormon and more evangelical
Mm-hmm.
the longer it goes on, because it ended up on all those non-secular book lists.
Only because of the abstinence before marriage.
Right. Because that, is a thing with vampires.
Yeah. And it was kind of funny because in the fourth book, Edward and his father are trying to convince um, Bella to have an abortion,
Yeah.
basically. And the reviewer pointed out, you expect me to believe that 500-year-old devout Catholic Carlisle is going to perform an abortion? Meyer isn't even keeping to her own characteristics at that point.
Yeah, that was I mean, the characterizations in Twilight. Why are we attempting to analyze Twilight? It defies
Yeah.
it. It's not competent enough writing to be analyzed in any
Okay.
meaningful way.
So
But
that's the point I wanted to make. It's like, yes, on one hand, I say if you enjoy it, whether it's feminist or not, shouldn't matter. However, when you get to stuff like Twilight or Colleen Hoover, I'm going to judge you for liking it because
that's fair. But I also think, well, you're fair to judge because it's shit.
yeah, and I believe it is valid to critique that work.
It's garbage. But the question is, why did it become so appealing?
Mm-hmm.
What was the draw of Twilight? And I asked a couple of teenage girls who were engrossed in the movie when I was at my friend's place.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, we like Bella because she's stupid. And I was like, interesting. And
tell me more about that.
Well, they were so starved for a flawed female protagonist that Bella was a breath of fresh air instead of these unattainable aspirational heroines that they didn't feel like they could ever be. And so here was somebody who was a complete disaster, and this great guy. We can decide whether Edward's a great guy or
quote
not.
unquote, he is not. For anyone who's questioning
Edward's
that, he's
abusive.
Not.
Team Jacob all the way.
Jacob wasn't much better, though.
Well, they had to heel turn him because it was becoming so clear that Edward was such a shitbag that they had to balance the scales for the plot. But before that, Jacob was an all right guy.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that's when it's really important to, I'm not going to say Twilight's great because it made some people feel included.
Mm-hmm.
It's shitty writing. But the fact that something that awful caught for something so very human, I think is instructive, because, you know, isn't that kind of what guys are saying now about the media that they feel like they're losing?
Because... So this is going to be totally random, but it's something I've kind of been wanting to bring up for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I saw a tweet from a woman recently who was saying men have convinced themselves that back in 2015, the world was just filled with gorgeous women. And now
that's interesting.
Here's the thing. What were the trends in 2015, though? It was tighter clothing. It was well, not
because it had already started to
before that, back in, like, I think it was more like 10 years ago or so that they said.
But it's like the 90s were the tube tops and exposed midriffs. I mean, Jade from Beyond Good and Evil is canceled now.
Well, no, but I'm looking specifically at like back when women were doing the full face of makeup before, because that was trendy back in the early 2010s.
I mean, lashes and wing eyeliner have not gone out of style.
True, but it's like,
if anything, everything's more intense now.
Because I feel like I see a lot more women in the baggy 90s jeans.
Oh, that's just because people got, it's the hard pants, soft pants debate post-COVID.
True.
You know, I think that's it. What I think it is it's gone extreme.
And I just think that, like, if there are men who are saying, oh, women used to be so much prettier, I think it's just because there was a time before the pandemic when women put in a lot more effort.
Well, and I know personally, every time someone brings up the women of a certain age are past their prime, I go, fuck it. Why am I putting in all this effort? If that's what the world thinks, I'm not going to bother. It's not getting me anything because it's useless or cougar. And I'm not interested in either. I just want to be a damn person. And I think that's why everybody is cheering on people like Michelle Yeoh, you know, who are having a third act to her career in her 60s. And this whole thing about a woman's worth being tied to reproduction, I can't believe any group of feminists is getting on board with that. And this is an example of how hate makes you stupid, because they're so obsessed with trans women, they've lost the plot. Because these are older women driving the TERF movement, right? They remember the second wave. They remember what the second wave was about: bodily autonomy. And now it's about a real woman can have a baby?
And it's like, here's the thing. Look, if the bathroom is such an issue, I say this a little facetiously. Yeah. If the bathroom is such an issue, bring back the bathroom attendants, hire retired veterans, and they can make sure nothing happens in the bathroom.
That's the thing. These are solvable problems. You don't have to deperson a person to solve the problem of where people take a shit. Like, everybody is tired of fighting about bathrooms.
Yeah.
Everybody is tired. I am so sick of the whole sports thing now. Because let's face it, you want to talk inequality equality. Look at the men's sport versus women's sport. I don't know why the same people have been going, well, women's sport is just lower quality. That's why they get paid so much less. Suddenly care so very much about protecting women's sport. They did nothing but shit on it until they could use it to shit on something else. It's so obvious. And yet these so-called feminists are aligning themselves with card-carrying misogynists to go after trans people. And they haven't had a maybe we're the bad guys moment.
But we the baddies.
But that's just the sex negative feminists, the sequel. You know, sex negative feminist 2, vagina boogaloo. It's just, you know, this is just the feminist sex wars all over again. Instead of sex, we're making it about gender. But let's drill down. Why is this such a big deal? Because again, this idea of biologically essentialist feminism is based on the idea of a woman's worth is in how much suffering she can endure. And bullshit to that. That is the biggest problem I see with the and I'd say the current state of feminism, but this has been a problem with it all along. You know, the suffragettes had no time for the ladies of the working class who didn't care about voting. They wanted to be able to keep their wages. And that became a real problem in terms of messaging because they lost the majority. And that was, believe it or not, where the whole gender as a class thing came from. Frederick Engels floated the idea that no, you didn't have to be divided by class, ladies, because your gender is a class. And this was very appealing to the women of the noble classes that wanted their way, but they needed the unwashed masses to get popular support. But it was always just so that the minority could enforce their will and their priorities on the majority. It was all about noble women wanting the vote, but needing working class women when they didn't give a shit about the priorities of working class women. And that's what happened in the second wave with, I said, lesbians and Black women. And now it's happening again, but now the divisions there's so many divisions that now the model is starting to strain under its own weight. Now, there's still a powerful minority that the majority is getting lumped into. And that's what I hope people take away from this. Is that the loudest opinions you're seeing in the media are not the majority opinions. And people immediately reject this every time I say it. That the stuff you hear are the opinions of people who have it real good and have important, powerful friends who can give them a microphone. Yeah. It's not the concerns of the average woman. We see the numbers. Lesbians do not have a problem with trans women by majority. The average woman does not share the concerns of the loudest feminists. You know, basically what you hear over and over and over again is, I'm fine with beautiful, sexy women in media, just don't insult my intelligence. And
like, look, when it comes to a women's spa, I understand why some women would get uncomfortable with a trans woman in this space.
Yeah, uncomfortable. There were women who were uncomfortable with Black women in their spaces back in the day.
And I think instead of screaming, it's about finding a solution.
Yeah.
In a way that works for everybody.
Well, I do think that we have to have a deeper conversation, like I said earlier, about why so many people are terrified of other people, because that's really the message. They're taking it out on trans women. But let's face it, the thing these TERFs are really afraid of, and I'm using TERFs here because trans exclusionary radical feminists, the thing these anti-trans so-called feminists are really afraid of is men. And they're so afraid of men, and this is the way a lot of women screen dates too. So, you know, like I said, I disagree with everything the TERF movement is about, but I can understand the emotional underpinnings here. And they are so afraid of even the potential for, I don't know, it's not logical anymore. It is just fear of fear of fear. It's fear all the way down. Terror turtles all the way down. And that's real. These women have been afraid for so long. They're not being rational anymore.
And I think there have been branches of feminism that have promoted that.
Oh yeah.
Like the man hate is real in some sections of feminism. And that
I have my theories about that. I think that those are the man hate comes from the inability to truly stop wanting male approval. They want to be beautiful and sexy to someone, and they think they're never gonna be, and they can't deal.
I agree with that. Yeah. And I think it has promoted this because, of course, they use sexual assault and all this, and they turn it into fear and ferment that into hatred.
And it doesn't make any sense because they're not, it's, you know, we've made connections between incel culture and what we call black pill feminism before, but it really is the counterpoint to incels. At the end of the day, it's, I don't feel valued by society. I am lonely. I want support and validation. I don't think I'm ever going to get it. I'm ashamed and I rage. It's no different.
And it's like, I get that.
Oh, I get it.
I get being insecure and seeing attractive women, even like reading comic books at one point and being like, oh, wow, I can't compare to this. And
oh, yeah.
Even I don't think I could be in a relationship with a man who read comic books because I would feel so insecure about it. I have overcome that since then. But it's like, okay, I was there. I get that.
And you know what?
You have to mature beyond that.
But that's also something that those guys should listen to. Because they feel rejected by women, not even rejected, they feel invisible to women. And what you just said there was really powerful, because it's not that they're invisible. It's that, you know, the standard that's being set there is so unattainable that women are just like, I don't want to get anywhere near that. I don't want that to be the expectation.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, we look at my art. I've had a change of heart on those things. But
and also comic art has changed some. I mean, you know, Stepan Sejic is not Rob Liefeld. The art back in the day was pretty warped. Now, men and women, I mean, Namor had a 12-pack in Scott, I'm saying the movie version now. Namor. I admit I like the origin of the name in Wakanda Forever, so I'm sticking with it. But you know, there was some pretty warped art, and the way they were drawing women, when you see to me, the problem for everybody, and I've been studying this a long time, so I'm reasonably certain I'm right here. The problem is that only a very narrow portion of humanity is allowed to exist and be valued at one time.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody fights each other over that. But that is the actual driver that's the problem. We solve for that, a lot of these other issues go away.
And like that's what the body positive movement was supposed to be, was embracing all body types. Instead, it has become I'm I I'm all for body positivity. I do not like that it has become fat positivity. It's just not healthy, and they can make whatever excuses they want, but morbid obesity is not pretty.
I don't want to judge anybody, and I do, how do I put this? We went from anorexic to anorexic and unhealthy.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's that one, I think her name is Ashley Graham. She's a plus size model.
Oh, and she lost weight and everybody hated on her for it.
I know about that, but like it's like she has the curves, but her body is built that way because like
she looks like she's of a healthy weight.
Yeah. Let me make sure I'm using that.
Ashley Graham, right. It's Ashley Graham. Ashley Graham gives great face. She's actually a very good model. That's something a lot of people don't understand. There's actually a skill to modeling. It's not just about being pretty.
Yeah.
God, I was never the prettiest girl. Never. Not by a long shot. I was a damn good pinup model.
Yeah. And it's like you contrast someone like Ashley Graham or Christina Hendricks, who also has those amazing curves, with Tess Holliday.
I have no idea who that is, but I'm getting a picture based on the comparison.
She's very fat positive. She is obese. And it's not pretty. It's not healthy. And she can say, "Oh, I'm healthy and my husband loves me just the way I am." Oh, okay. But I don't believe in promoting that lifestyle. And
you know what? I think that there's a middle ground to be had here, which is self-acceptance. Like people need, in order to do something as difficult as losing a lot of weight, you need to feel like you have an inner self-worth to bother doing it. Because it should, you're right, you're taking the right priorities here. It should be about health, not about looks. And I do think that so much of it is about, it gets kind of hijacked by the idea of a beauty standard, when what you're talking about is actual physical health being compromised. And you're promoting an aesthetic that is unhealthy because of obesity is no different in terms of encouraging people to be unhealthy than anorexia. And when we make it about that instead of about, the politics of weight, what's going on becomes a lot clearer. And I like that you took that approach to it, because there is, what we consider a healthy body is set a little too rigidly. Yes, some people can be, I had a dance teacher. She was very plus size. She could do all the moves. Her body could do what she needed it to do. She was just Greek and very curvy. She, her body can do that. I mean, Lizzo gets a ton of physical activity. That's just the way she's built. There are genetics involved here. That's true. But I agree with you that, there's appearance, there's aesthetic, and then there's health. And we can't get so caught up on the aesthetics that we neglect our health, because that's just the same urge to prove your worth as a woman through suffering. If you're making yourself unhealthy to prove a point, you ain't happy.
Yeah.
And we are so, we have so collectively as a society just lost the plot on what we're all doing here in the first place, you know? Like we're so obsessed with
we're so caught up on all these things that don't actually matter,
yeah,
trying to fill the hole of things that actually do, that we feel powerless to affect.
that's a great way of putting it. That, you know, people are picking at the edges of this stuff instead of cutting to the core of what the issue really is. And that's not
And
helping anybody.
Part of it is because the core hurts, but
Yeah.
also fixing the core is going to take a lot of work.
Yeah.
And people try to avoid that work, but that is the only way we're going to get anywhere. You know, my friend and I were talking about, you know, the recent Supreme Court stuff, not just like the big one we were talking about was the student loan stuff and how Biden's veto has been, or executive order has been deemed unconstitutional, and it has to go through Congress.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, normally I would get that, but this is way too politicized,
right,
in order for anything to get done, because everyone has made this student debt issue a hill to die on,
right,
with no regard for the fact
the
that
people involved.
It is crippling our society.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a huge issue. And are we talking about the predatory industry and how that needs to be dealt with? And maybe if we're going to demand college education for everyone, the price should be at least somewhat reasonable.
Well said.
So there's all these things that have become these hills to die on and these sticking points. And what I said yesterday was things have to snap.
Yeah.
Like, we've been watching things ratchet up for years. We really saw it in 2016. And of course, everything came to a head in 2020. But I don't ask, things have to get better. No, things have to snap. Because at this point, the only way anything is going to change is things are actually going to have to break.
See, I actually think things are beginning to snap. And that's what we're seeing.
Yeah. And I agree, we're seeing it snap. Yeah. I'm just kind of waiting for the big one where everything falls down.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be very painful for a lot of people. And I mean, I think you're probably right. I'm going to try to, you know, do what I can to at least lessen the blow on people.
And it's like, and I'm not saying I want things to snap by any means.
Of course not. Yeah.
But it's like, I also know enough about history. That's the only way I see anything changing. And things have to get worse before they can get better, because there's no going back at this point.
Well, the people that were supposed to be the adults in the room aren't.
No.
And that's, I mean, the feminist movement has a lot of responsibility there, because they took their eye off the ball.
Mm-hmm.
I should say, I mean, technically I'm a part of it, but I'm such a pariah that, and it's because I was trying to say, you know, I was trying to let people see the train coming, and they didn't want to hear it. They wanted immediate validate me now. And they didn't listen to, okay, white, gender non-conforming nerd girl with a liberal arts degree that knows about postmodern theory and, you know, had the benefits of going to college. You're not speaking for the high school educated Latina, or, you know, the Black woman of the business degree. You're not universal. Your experience and your priorities are not the only thing that matters. Stop this. And they wouldn't. They just ran me out of town instead.
World ends, women and minorities most affected.
Well, and that's the thing, that my concern is that the people who the people who are going to be most affected by this are going to be those non-college educated people without the intergenerational wealth. And that's what's got me really worried, because they're the ones that, you know, these activists claim to care so very much about, but at the end of the day, their solutions are very much tailor-made for women like them, not women with whom they may disagree or even feel threatened by. And I do think that a lot of the stuff, you know, part of the reason I love Megan Thee Stallion is, let's face it, women like Megan Thee Stallion are the kind of women that scare the crap out of these so-called feminists. But I mean, her Savage song about the states of womanhood, you know, ratchet, bougie, classy, and the idea that women aren't one thing and we shouldn't have to be classy all the time. There's times where we want to get raw. And like, to me, that's those moments where women thirst over shirtless Thor. Like, yeah, that's kind of a ratchet moment. But so what?
Did you just call me ratchet?
No, I said a ratchet moment. Like, that's it. You're classy, right?
Yes.
You're classy. But you can have those moments.
Oh, yes.
And that's the way it should be. Nobody should have to be one thing all the time. That's boring. But that's exactly what these critical theory Marxist feminists, that's their solution. And that's bad art. You know it's bad art. I know it's bad art. Every artist out there knows you need identifiable characteristics. If we have to be safe, if we have to offend no one, we can say nothing.